Hey folks, Scott Weingart here, and you are listening to the EMCrit podcast. Now, what you are listening to on the EMCrit podcast today is a new type of show. This is the first of many expert rounds. Now, what are expert rounds? Expert rounds are like grand rounds, except they're good and not boring, and there's no PowerPoints. What I do is I grab a guest who is an expert in their field, or more likely in their niche in a field. And then we talk for a while. It's more luxurious than the 20 or 30 minute podcast you're used to. And as a result, we really get to go in depth and learn. And I think you're going to love them. And I want to hear feedback as always. So please let me know what you think of these. But the guest for the first of the EMCrit expert rounds is none other than Gita Pensa. Now, Gita has been an emergency physician for 25 years. She's been at Brown for the past 10 years as an EM doc. And I've known her on the speaking circuit. I think she's amazing, a fantastic lecturer, just brilliant. But there was a career shift at some point in which Dr. Pensa began dealing with well-being for people who are being sued, people in the midst of litigation. And the way I came across this work was through her podcast, Doctors and Litigation, the L Word. And this podcast blew me away. First of all, just the production value. So EMCrit is what we call a low production podcast, which means you just hear my voice. I think the audio is good, but it wouldn't be something you'd find on NPR. Now, high production podcasts are the ones where there's musical underlays, there's a bed of music, and they're interspersing between guests and the host doing asides and back and forth in this beautifully produced melange of audio. I don't do that crap. Too much work. I just do low production podcasts. But oh my God, Doctors and Litigation, the L Word, it's a high production value. But that would be useless if the information wasn't so incredible. And what this podcast is a curriculum for, first of all, dealing with a lawsuit once it happens, and then also avoiding lawsuits. And it's taken those two goals and it's really just overachieved, as I think is the way with Dr. Pensa, is overachievement at all stages, because it's just phenomenal. I can't recommend it highly enough. In fact, I did these rounds solely to get you to go and listen to every episode of that podcast because it's so friggin' good. The links to the podcast will be in the show notes for this episode. But I can't stress highly enough how important it is for anyone, at least in the United States, where that's where the specificity of the legal system really lies with that podcast. You just got to listen. You have to. I don't care if you're in academics or community. It's vitally important you know all this information. But enough of that. Let's roll right into the show. I am so happy to have you here. And you are the inaugural guest for our first ever expert rounds on EMCrit. And so I am.
Wow.
I'm super excited, and it could not have picked a better guest because you are a true expert in a niche that I think you have created. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Hi, Scott. I'm so excited to be here. And that is a huge honor, actually, in my opinion. And I'm very sorry. I kept you waiting today. I was a little late, but the whole time I was racing to get here, in my head was slow is smooth, smooth is fast. It's fine.
That's exactly right.
How many people you're like the voice in their head when they're doing a tricky intubation or whatever, just slow, smooth, fast, just okay. Because you've certainly been in mine. So this is a great honor to be here. My name is Gita Pensa. I am an emergency physician. I've been at that for about 25 years. And maybe we can talk a little bit about, this is probably a career transition time for me. And I am doing more and more work in the sphere of medical malpractice litigation. And I am currently a well-being coach for physicians and other clinicians in litigation. I try to educate widely on the topic, and I have started in the last couple of years doing witness preparation work for insurers and attorneys when they think that a physician-to-physician relationship is something that would be particularly helpful. And I'm finding that very rewarding. Piloting a cool new program with an insurance company. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. So yeah, that is in a nutshell who I am.
Now, you talk about voices in each other's heads. And I'd always known of you, been on the circuit. You've obviously had, accolades. People think you're a fantastic speaker. Never actually got to meet you. And full admission here, I still haven't gotten to meet you aside from what we've done right now. And yet I feel I have a parasocial relationship with you because I've been listening to the entirety of your podcast since its inception, and it is spectacular. And the thing that comes through podcasts is you really do feel that you begin to know the person who is hosting the podcast. And you come across as just so wonderful, so capable of expressing emotion, just a immense capability to educate. I wish any person who had been in the process of litigation that's already been completed had gotten to hear your podcast. And now I hope that this podcast will inspire people who do wind up in that dire strait to listen before they go any further, because it will give such a wealth of information and preparation for what's going to come. What led to the podcast?
The basic story is that I was the defendant in a really prolonged medical malpractice case that started when I was about 5 years out of residency. So when I was early on in my career, I was a nocturnist, and I was a nocturnist in a community hospital. So I thought I was really good at what I did. I would run this emergency department at night, literally only doctor in the hospital. There were no hospitalists. I would go up to the floor, put out fires there. We had a 6-bed ICU and nobody in house. So sometimes I would go take care of that stuff. We had L&D, nobody in house. So I would sometimes go up and take care of that stuff and then come down to the ER. And it was in equal measure terrifying and awesome. And I thought I was really good. And all of that came to this crashing halt and you would think that a career changing case would be one of those forays to L&D or whatever. It was not. It was just this young woman who came in with eye pain in the middle of the night. And I wound up discharging her. We can talk about the case, not talk about the case, whatever you want. But the long and the short of it is I let this woman go home. And about an hour later, she had a pretty massive cerebellar stroke. And then I didn't even know about it. She got taken to a tertiary care center after that. And I found out about it a few months later when I got named in a lawsuit. And what was really striking was that I did not know one thing about everything. My whole world just felt like it collapsed. My whole identity as a good doctor collapsed. And I didn't know who to call. I literally was like, what do I do right now with this? And I couldn't name my malpractice insurance carrier. I did not know that was the first thing I was supposed to do. And I was in a complete place of panic while also feeling this guilt, grief, just completely flattened by this event, right? Someone comes in and puts their faith in you. And I don't know I didn't know what happened, but somehow it didn't work out. I wanted it to. And so there was just this complete sea of just suffering in all directions. And the problem was that went on for a really long time. And eventually I went on trial in 2011. So I was the sole face of this case. It had an initial $28 million demand was the first number they threw out. I was like, where am I going to get $28 million? I feel terribly about this in the first place. I have no idea if what I did is defensible. I was alternately angry and just flattened by grief. And I still had to keep showing up to work. I wanted to quit. And so it was after I went to trial, that was 4.5 weeks. I won. There was a defense verdict. And then they appealed the verdict. And so after a number of years of continuing to suffer through this, they overturned my verdict in 2015, and I fell in a very deep hole. And the podcast came out of what happened after that, which is basically the question is, are you going to stay in the hole because you've been in the hole for a really long time, or are you going to get yourself out of here? Because I literally was having thoughts of, I am going to die at the bottom of this hole, or can I swear on this podcast?
Not only can you, but it's encouraged.
All right. I got to figure this shit out. I can't be like this anymore. I have lost, at this point, it's been 8 years of my life. Kids were growing up. Life was happening. I was fucking missing all of it because I was so miserable. And I hated work. 8 years, I did the job. And this is before I entered academics. And so entering academics, becoming part of the circuit, like you mentioned, all that stuff happened after as a result of being like, all right, let us do a fair assessment of like life in the whole. Life in the whole sucks. So how the fuck am I going to get out of here? And that started this journey out, which we can talk more about. But the podcast was the culmination of not only getting myself out, but learning a lot about myself and medicine and life and litigation and how to be a good defendant. And the fact that I think that we think about this completely wrong in terms of how we approach it in medicine. And so that's where the podcast came from. And here we are.
I don't want to talk about the case because it would steal the opportunity for people to listen to that episode that you had me on tenterhooks waiting, but you kept hinting at some point in the podcast, I'll tell you about my case. And then it finally came, and the rage I felt as a proxy for you was very high. It was absolutely ridiculous that it went through not one, but two trials. And then to listen to the expert testimony that was with straight face said on the stand. And it's enraging. And it, I think, will fuel the discussion today, because the fact that something like that could happen is, I think, indicative of the problems that we face in U.S. in our litigation system for medical malpractice.
1,000%. Yes. And if you go into this experience blind to those facts, if you go in expecting the system, I always say to people, if you go into this expecting fairness, you're going to be very disappointed. It doesn't work like medicine. A lot of it doesn't matter. In some cases, you want to get down to these fine points about research and the evidence is this, like a lot of that shit's not going to matter. So learning about what this world is about, how to function in it, how to keep your sanity while you're in it. And not only that, but it's learning about how to just be a part of another culture. When you get to this place of just acceptance, because it shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be like this. It is like this, right? So you and I can talk about coaching stuff all day long. When you're like, it should not be like this, you are wasting your time unless you're going to get to work on like actually changing that system. But you are arguing with reality, and that will not get you very far.
You don't often win when you have that argument. So
You do not often win. And so instead figuring out like, all right, here I am. What do I do about it? Like, how do I get myself the best possible outcome for myself living in this land? But first you got to learn how to speak the language, everybody's motivations, how is it you're supposed to show up, what's going to be the most advantageous for you to be there, and that you have a right to defend not only your care. I honestly don't even care whether you feel like you could have done better, but you have the right to defend the practice of medicine, because people misunderstand the practice of medicine and have very unrealistic expectations. And learning how to communicate that strategically to a jury, in a deposition, as a witness, I think is a critical skill.
Could not agree more. I want to start off the conversation with how to avoid getting sued, and then we will transition to what happens if you actually do. I'm sure you have thoughts. I haven't heard a ton of it on the podcast yet, but I imagine it will be coming. But I'm sure you have thoughts on how doctors could avoid having to ever deal with litigation and malpractice.
I do. Let's talk about that. I do, but it's interesting. I feel like we do spend a lot of time in risk management. I don't like the term risk management because it implies that risk can be like fully managed somehow, and it can't, right? In our environment, you cannot fully manage risk, but can you reduce it? Yes, you certainly can. But I don't like the focus on risk management and then the complete absence of education around anything that happens after you're sued, because the implication is if you follow all the rules, then you won't wind up in this position. Mm-hmm. And yet the grand majority of us do. So it leads us societally in medicine to believe that, oh, I must not have followed the risk management rules. Like I did something wrong inherently, because the implication when you aren't taught about what to do when you're sued is good doctors don't get sued. That's why we don't teach it. So with that caveat in mind, yes, I have a lot of thoughts about risk management. The truth of it is, the thing that I have found now, and certainly learning how to teach communication to juries, to on a stand, to lay people, I've learned a lot about communication with patients. And I think it's made me actually a better doctor, because a huge portion of what we do is communicate. And yes, you should practice good medicine. It's a great place to start. You should have great listening skills because a lot of times the answer isn't as obvious as you think it is when you walk in the room, where you walk in and think it's a slam dunk. And then if you listen long enough, then there's a little, and you're like, wait, what? And if you don't hear the wait, what, then you don't go back and ask all the questions that are going to all of a sudden change the course of things. So communication is huge. Being a good listener is huge, which is obviously part of communication. And then for emergency medicine, obviously, it's keeping your skill set honed. And there is something to documenting. People spend a lot of time, and I think excessive time, documenting every single possibility, every thought that they had in their mind. That doesn't really help. Tell a good story in your chart. Let your chart reflect that you thought about the important things, and let it reflect most of all that you cared about this person in front of you. And that's going to go a really long way. It may not keep you out, because the truth of it is a bad outcome. The essence of what you're asking me is, how do we avoid having bad outcomes? Sometimes we can't, right? But if at least you show that you were thoughtful and that you cared, and the only way that you really have to show that is with your words to the patient so that they know that you care about them, and your words in the chart so that people looking at it retrospectively know that you cared about the patient. Those things do go a long way.
I think that you've hit on the major points, and I want to dwell on them a little bit, because I see ED docs all the time that are, if they don't feel the patient should be there, or they don't like the particular complaint, or they think the patient's seeking narcotics, they have a tendency to be incredibly abrasive. And I understand where that comes from. I can understand the frustrations, but if anything bad happens to that patient, you've just set up a force multiplier of animosity. And I don't get it, because being this, at least externally, even if I'm quite happy with fake it till you make it, or fake it forever in your career, but just giving off this outward appearance of just being this TV doctor, being the doctor that they think they should get, is so protective in my estimation. How does that hit you?
That actually, let me tell you a story. I think I probably was for quite a number of years, especially when litigation was going on. And I was like, man, all these people are out to sue me. This sucks. And I don't want to be here, but I got loans. And so what else am I going to do? How many other skills? I can crack a chest. But then like, who else is going to hire me? That's it. But I was miserable. I was miserable at work for quite a number of years. And I think that there are degrees of miserable. When I talk to people about those years, they were like, you seem fine, but I don't know. I really know that I wasn't as kind or as patient as I might have been. And it wasn't until actually I started, and people always cringe at the working on myself. I started working on myself when I started digging out of the hole. And one of the things was, how am I going to what I do again? Like, I got to love it now, or I got to leave it. I got to figure this out one way or the other. I'm staying or I'm going. But if I'm staying, I am going to try to learn how to love this thing again. And one of the things I began to focus on was just resetting in it. Every time I would walk into a room, I would reset my intention. And then that whole resetting of my intention sounds like gobbledygook, right? But that is one of the things that you learn as you're being coached, or when you get therapy, when you become a coach, which is I eventually did. Taking just a microsecond of mindfulness to think, what am I doing here? How can I help this person? What is my mission? And just having that reset was enough to go into a room, and taking a minute afterwards when interactions went well to reflect on, there is some meaning in the skills that we have, operating with a deep respect for what we've been taught to do, because a lot of it is miraculous, frankly. And it was really helpful. And then for the difficult patients, sometimes there's nonsense going on. You got to put a stop to it. Not put too fine a point on that. But for the things that are just chafing your last nerve and the patient you've been seeing through the revolving door every day, I read this essay once, and I wish if anyone listening is the person who wrote it, please find me, because it was many years ago, but it hit me in the head. And it was an essay about the spiritual satisfaction of being in emergency medicine and being the one person that day who might truly care about an individual. So you're chronic alcoholic, you're unhoused schizophrenic, who in the day is going to be nice to them? You might be the only person. And maybe you can't fix the problem, but do you have to make them feel less than because they need a turkey sandwich? Do you? And it hit me. And so then I was like, I cut that thing out. I carried it in my pocket for a long time, right? And I don't know what happened to it. Actually, it just disintegrated, but it just got absorbed into my ethos. And can I do that every time? No. But can I remind myself of that? If I go into a room and I think like that, and I really do try to come at it from an angle of compassion, the interaction always goes better. It always goes better. And I think they feel it. I think patients can feel when you care.
I have no doubt. And I could talk about this stuff for hours. So I'm going to restrain myself because I'm already like, oh no, this conversation's going to diverge to the stuff that you and I both just are really in love with right now. But I want to talk a little bit about the state of play in the United States, because I am always surprised when I speak to graduating residents and I say, how much do you understand about how the malpractice system actually works? And I find out it is dismal. And for all the audio listeners, Gita has a 0 on her forehead right now. All right, free EMCrit listeners, that's where I'm cutting this. That was about 21 minutes. There is another 58 minutes of these expert rounds, 58 minutes of incredible information on what to do when you get sued, how experts work, why the medical litigation system is so broken. Just brilliant, brilliant stuff that you're not hearing because you're not a member, and you should be. So just go to emcrit.org/join. And today you'll hear the rest of this episode in addition to all of the amazing stuff that EMCrit membership comes with, which is things that will keep you on the cutting edge of resuscitation and acute critical care. So just think about it, and I'll talk to you soon. All right, folks, there you go. So usually we'll shoot for 1 hour, but this was just too good. I couldn't edit any of it. I was looking like, what could I cut? What could I cut? I couldn't cut anything. So there you go. If you loved listening to Gita, as I do, then you should listen to her podcast. It's called Doctors in Litigation, the L Word. You could find it on all of the podcast sites. Just search for it, and I've linked to it in the show notes. There's also another thing you should watch. It is called A World of Hurt, How Medical Malpractice Fails Everyone. And now this is a documentary made by 2 medical students, and it's pretty powerful, and it's free. And Dr. Pensa is one of the people interviewed in it. So you should totally check it out. I've linked to that in the show notes as well. Or you can just go to YouTube and search for A World of Hurt. But they take 3 patient experiences with various permutations in the malpractice system. And it is touching. And it is well worth your time. It's about 25 minutes. So it is not an entire night. It is a break from whatever work you were doing. So check that out. If you like these expert rounds, let me know. Give me a little shout in the comments and tell me what's going on, because I want to know. My plan is to do a bunch of these, maybe once every other month or so. Full episodes for the paying members, obviously just a snippet, a little wee bit for the non-paying members, because you should be a paying member. You should just go to emcrit.org/join and join, and then you'd never have to hear silliness, berating you again. Okay. Let me know what you think. Scott Weingart for the EMCrit podcast saying bye-bye.